Hello, everybody. If I could ask you to please take your seats, we're going to get started. We've got such a great program, and we don't want to run short on time, and we certainly don't want to cut into the networking cocktail hour. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Northern Arizona Industry Forecast Forum. It's fantastic to see everybody here in person. I'm Kim Sabo, the President and CEO of the Arizona Lodging and Tourism Association, and we serve as the statewide voice of advocacy for what I think is the most fabulous industry in the entire world. It was just a year ago we were here, and we had to film this. We were up against the beautiful Red Rocks, filming the intro to the webinar, and there's nothing quite like being here in person, so this is fantastic. Thank you all for being here. I'd like to give a special shout out to Vice Mayor Jablo. I almost said Scott Joslove. Another industry icon. Yes, thank you, Mr. Vice Mayor. Appreciate you being here. And again, thank you all for being here. I know that you've taken time out of your days. This is going to be a fantastic program with great speakers. We'll get to them momentarily. But I want to tell you how grateful we are for your continued partnership and support, which is demonstrated by your attendance here today. We have many challenges before us, as well as many opportunities that we must not lose sight of. And to better position our industry for success, your engagement is essential. And I don't want to go off on a big membership tangent, but I'm just going to, I need to touch on this because it's critically important. And you have QR codes on your table that will take you directly to the AZLTA website. I encourage you and beg you to please go to that and really explore becoming a member of the AZLTA. Again, we're the voice of advocacy, working day in and day out on behalf of you and a positive business operating environment for you all to succeed. And what's most important to us is that we grow our chorus of voices, and we cannot do that without you joining us. So again, please use that QR code. We're very proud of ourselves. We've become very technologically savvy with younger team members that know how to do that stuff. I do not. But anyway, again, I encourage you, please visit our site and explore. We've got opportunities for join now, pay later. Again, most importantly is that you join our voice. You all make it possible for us to pursue our charge to advocate for a healthy operating environment, advocate for policy that safeguards that ever-important balance that Sedona knows better than anybody, that balance between a thriving visitor economy and a resident quality of life. Also our charge on the education front, our charge to attract and foster the talent necessary for our industry's recovery and growth into the future. Leading that charge is our exceptional AZLTA Board of Directors, led by our esteemed Chairman, Jerry Fisher, Executive Vice President of HSL Properties. Jerry has taken the time to join us all the way from Tucson today, and I will tell you that his leadership, dedication, and commitment to better positioning this industry for success in the future has been transformational. Without any further ado, I'd love to invite the chairman of the board to come up and say a few remarks.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Kim, thanks so much. I want to welcome everyone to, which is I believe our third leg of the industry forecast. This is the third leg, but it's certainly not the least of the three. I have an affinity for this part of the state, as I went to college in Flagstaff, so I love the area. Spent many times down in Oak Creek, sliding on my butt with everyone else. I'll be brief, but again, welcome, thank you. I'm a fellow hotelier from Tucson, so I like many of you in this room, I feel your pain from the last 18 months. I think we'll get through this. We have some great subject matter experts today from Office of Tourism that are going to take us through the numbers of our state and tourism and how important that is. And then we're also going to have some folks on employment litigation help us out in understanding that field as well. And I think lastly, we're going to have the subject matter expert from STAR that's going to take us through a look really on what's transpired over the COVID period and what's ahead of us as well, not only from a national level, a state of Arizona level, but also a localized regional level in northern Arizona. So, and lastly, I would be remiss if I didn't thank Stan. I don't know where Stan's sitting. Thank you so much for hosting this. A great event and beautiful, beautiful resort. So with that, thank you so much, Kim.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. Really appreciate your leadership and your dedication, commitment to joining us today. In addition to our chairman, we have several additional members of our board of directors. If I could ask you to please just quickly stand, raise your hand. Just want to recognize you. Lonnie, Debbie, I don't want to miss anybody, Stan, any additional board members. Again, just an extraordinary group of leaders that is transforming this industry and best positioning us in front of policymakers for success into the future. And of course, our work would not be possible without the generous support of our industry sponsors. Please join me in thanking the team here at the gorgeous Enchantment Resort and Miyamo Spa, led by Managing Director Stan Kantowski. Stan, thank you so much for hosting us today. Beautiful setting, no complaints, really appreciate it. And our sincere gratitude to today's event production sponsor, Encore, led by Vice President Neil Williams, who is also a member of the board. Talk about pivoting and reinventing during these last 18 months. Nobody's done it better than Encore, going virtual, going hybrid, having to pivot on a daily basis. They've done it better than anybody. And finally, before getting to today's exciting program and our stellar lineup of presenters that Jerry mentioned, please join me in thanking and welcoming a phenomenal newish addition to the Arizona tourism ecosystem, an industry leader that Sedona very wisely plucked from Big Sky, Montana, to lead Arizona's first sustainable tourism destination. At the helm of the Sedona Chamber of Commerce and Tourism Bureau, please welcome President and CEO Candace Strauss.
So first, welcome to Sedona, those of you who traveled in to be with us today. On behalf of the Sedona Chamber of Commerce and Tourism Bureau staff and board, which I have many board members here this evening, Al Camello is this year's board chair, Lonnie Lilly, our past board chair, Stan Kantowski, our lovely host, Cheryl Barron is here with us as well, and John Davis. Have I missed any of my board members? No, okay, good. I'd also love to recognize the Sedona Lodging Council. There are numerous members here from that as well. And I've just come off a plane from IPW in Las Vegas. Hopefully all of you heard the exciting news that we will be reopening our international borders to the EU. And my staff I have staff in Phoenix and my staff has driven up. Ryan, she's in from Vegas as well. And hopefully everyone heard the cheers of joy from the domestic tourism industry from the floor of Las Vegas and IPW Global Marketplace with the reopening and the reestablishment of service in November. So the future is very bright. The power of travel to inspire and show and grow our communities is alive and well. We've never been stronger as an industry, even under attack over the last year in many places. And so we look forward to working together with all of you in the year ahead. And thank you for being here. And I stand between you and the program and you in between the amazing reception that Stan has outside. So with that, I just want to thank everyone for being here this evening. And if I haven't met you, please introduce yourself later throughout the course of the evening. I'd love to meet you. Thanks, Kim. So we're going to all sing happy birthday because it is Kim Sabo's birthday today and she's working on her birthday. So if you could all join me, we'll do real quick. Happy birthday to Kim. It's cutting into the program. Okay, but how about after on the patio with
Let's do that.
champagne in our hands, okay? All right. Thank you.
Candace, you're too cute. Thank you so much. When we were trying to identify a date, we landed upon September 23rd, and I thought, what better way to celebrate my birthday than at Enchantment in Sedona? So thrilled. Candace, thank you so much. And now to our exciting program of speakers. Joining us first, please welcome Colleen Floyd, Director of Research at the Arizona Office of Tourism. Colleen and her team provide insight into the scale and economic impact of Arizona's tourism economy. Her research program provides data-driven guidance for AOT's destination marketing and strategic efforts. Colleen also leads the agency's continuous improvement initiatives as part of Governor Doug Ducey's Arizona Management System. Please join me in welcoming Colleen Floyd.
All right. Thank you, Kim, and thank you to the team at AZLTA for having me. I love these kinds of presentations because I love talking and seeing everyone in person, so I'm very, very glad we're doing this in person. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah. Okay, I keep wanting to move away from the microphone, so just like wave at me if I do that. All right, so typically, my job as a research director is to look at all of these long-term trends over a year, pick out these weird anomalies, and help us as an agency build this very solid strategy for the next year to come. So COVID really dumped that on its head. It was really interesting. So we had to really lean heavily on newer technologies, faster moving data, in order to respond appropriately to all of these shifting dynamics and still stay very true to Arizona's travel brand and who we are as a state and all these incredible travel opportunities that we have here. That's not to say that 2020 was not an incredibly tough year. So we welcomed 32.1 million overnight visitors last year to the state, and they spent collectively $15 billion into Arizona's economy. However, that's about a 15 million fewer number of visitors, so that's quite a bit. And not only did visitation fall, but spending fell even faster, so 31% compared to 41%. This was very common across the country. I think U.S. Travel had their spending losses at about 42% below 2019 levels, so we're certainly not alone here. So travelers tended to trim their spending in almost every commodity associated with travel, with some very regional exceptions, as you'll see here. So right now what I have here is Coconino, Gila, and Yavapai counties, and total traveler spending based on the commodity they purchased. So local transportation and gas tends to follow gas prices. Gas prices were pretty cheap in 2020, so that one it's a big dip, but doesn't necessarily mean consumption was that much lower. The big ones were typically across the state, lower accommodation spending, retail, a little bit of retail, and food service, and particularly arts, entertainment, and recreation. And you can see this really varied regionally. Every county was different. Cities within counties were very different. Coconino saw some of the steepest decreases, and that really made a lot of sense given their reliance on international visitation from the Grand Canyon. Gila, on the other hand, managed to have some pretty minor reductions comparatively when we look at other counties across the state, and even grew accommodation spending by 19%. So people were just flocking to these smaller rural areas and away from the cities. And that really showed up in the data. So I do want to keep in mind, so I'm coming from a very broad data perspective, and I'm sure this felt very different in different areas. So your property may have had a very different experience than these numbers might suggest. So what we have here is spend by the type of accommodation that traveler chose. So we have a trend line for people who stayed in hotels, motels, and short-term vacation rentals in the gray. We have day travelers in the orange. And vacation home, people who stayed in private homes, presumably with friends and family, in the lower levels. And what I thought was really interesting about Yavapai County is for years, day traveler spending and hotel visitor spending tended to be pretty equal. So naturally there must have been lots more day visitors, because if you're not spending money on lodging, you're not spending as much. But the spending in the last few years has really taken off by those hotel visitors, and everything dropped off a little bit, not a little bit, a lot in 2020. So if we look at just the percentage change year over year for these different travelers and their different accommodation types, day travelers and hotel, motel, and short-term vacation rentals, they both fell by about 20%, pretty in lockstep. The big drop was in people who stayed in private homes, and that was pretty true across the country. It seemed like people were not as interested in going to see friends and family as much this year, and they were very much in need of vacations instead. And vacation home spending was very resilient across the board. I think people were very determined to still visit their vacation homes. I would be too. So again, this shows up, we like to look at data in a couple different ways. So that was spending data, this is survey data, and it shows basically the same thing. People staying in the home of friends and relatives fell off in 2020. And then there was a big decrease in resort hotel at the state level, and a huge increase in other hotels, again, at the state level. But Phoenix is throwing off the data here. When we get more into the regional data, it's a very different story. Resorts, I think, in Tucson and here, I think Vail will touch on, they did very well comparatively. So it's a very different story. And we'll get into this. We're just starting to dig into the regional data for our annual regional webinars. So keep an eye on our newsletter for that. So we'll be hosting those this fall. The other lodging that seemed to grow last year are just the smaller ones, the bed and breakfasts, the country inns and lodges. So you really see that movement of people away from the larger urban hotels and out into smaller properties. And probably one of the best visualizations is how occupancy performed over the year and so far in 2021. So what we have here is the map is colored by average occupancy for the whole year by county. So the darker the county, the higher the occupancy. And we can see just how much occupancy was lost in 2020 in some places, but this is where our regional differences really break out because Pinal, Mojave, and really to an extent Gila and Yavapai counties managed to hold on to a lot more than the rest of the state. And then now we have through 2021 through July so far, seeing a little more color in those urban counties, but still even darker in many of the other counties, including Yavapai, which is, I believe, higher than even in 2019. So definitely a busy market right now. The other question that I tend to get is how have accommodations like Airbnb impacted the market? So from a statewide perspective, there was definitely an increase in these two, so rented cottages and rented homes, condos, things that are likely to be rented on Airbnb. They definitely saw increases, but if you see in the gray, it's a little tough to see. Those increases were happening before COVID hit, so it seems to be a trend that was happening before the pandemic rather than this question of are people going to flock to smaller accommodations like those. As a more socially distant option. I didn't really see evidence of that. But that's not to say that they're not a major player in the lodging scene in Arizona. So what we have here are lodging tax collections for the state, broken out into traditional hotels and then once put on online lodging marketplaces. So that's in the blue. So Airbnb, those types are in the blue. And we can see that the blue is starting to creep up. There's definitely more and more of it as time goes by. So if I take just that online lodging and make it a percentage of all of the taxes that were collected in that month, there are some shocking months of year-over-year growth. So we have 2019 in gray, and then that orange 2020. Some of these increases, they doubled their share of lodging taxes during 2020 in a lot of months. But it seems to have normalized a little bit. So the last few months, May, June, and July that we have, you're not seeing those 100%, 70% increases year over year. It's a little more stable. So it's going to be interesting to keep an eye on this one as we move forward. All right, so now we have 2 quarters of data from our visitor profile, and that's our survey that we purchase every year. So it's interesting to see, all right, now we've got all of 2020 in. Let's see if these weird anomalies are going to stick through 2021. And the big one is this visiting friends and relatives. Is that coming back? Is that going to stay low? And as far as I can see, it's starting to stay low. So we're looking at Q1 was still mostly normal, so we're kind of lumping that in with 2019. But even so, in 2021 so far, those visits are lower, and that has definitely held through April, May, and June. We're still seeing big increases in touring, so that can be up to whoever's taking the survey can interpret that how they want. I tend to think of it as road trips or just going around and seeing sites. So definitely lots of travel there and huge increases in outdoor trips. So knowing that people are still taking lots of road trips, still maybe a little bit nervous to get on planes, AOT has kind of embraced that because Arizona is an amazing state for road trips. And we've designated 2021 as the year of the road trip. So that will be a series of itineraries and PR efforts to really promote just these amazing road trips that we have around Arizona, get people to see the whole state. And then back to that outdoors, we can see it's really showing no signs of slowing down, a little bit lower in Q2, but not a lot. And with all of those outdoor trips, and I know it is very acutely felt out here, tends to stress out not only our residents, but also the trails. There's more trash. We really have to give a lot of credit to Sedona for leading the way here. But this year, Arizona Office of Tourism has really embraced the Leave No Trace principles, and we've developed our Appreciate AZ program. So part of that program is a consumer education campaign that helps educate visitors who research shows that they generally really want to protect the areas they recreate. Sometimes they just don't know how. So we will be and have been marketing those 7 principles, trying to educate people so they can tread more lightly on our very amazing and very fragile outdoor resources. So we also have partner resources as part of Appreciate AZ, and you are very much encouraged to check them out. We have a toolkit. All that beautiful artwork is part of a toolkit that you can share on social media. We've created some really beautiful posters, so those are all absolutely available to you. And the other thing we have are a series of online courses where it kind of trains frontline staff to be able to engage people before they recreate in a very non-confrontational, very approachable way, and help them have a great and safe experience. All right, so business is the sector that really has struggled quite a bit during the pandemic and continues to. We're seeing kind of mixed signals on recovery here. We saw a little bit of a bump in Q2 for conferences, but certainly not back to normal levels. You see that big spike in business leisure in Q2, April through June. If you look a little deeper, a lot of people came to Arizona just to work remotely. So they were doing plenty of work, leisure kind of mixes. And a lot of people said they attended conferences when we knew for a fact that there were 0 in-person conferences happened. And so I was like, that was on Zoom. Cool. And the accommodation patterns, they're not really changing a whole lot. In fact, some of them are increasing. Still lots of people staying in smaller bed and breakfasts, a little bit of life in the resort hotel, but again, I don't think this applies to your market particularly. Still lots of hotels outside, bless you. And that pattern more or less held up in Q2 as well. And these slides will be available afterwards, so no need to worry about looking at a million bars. So we get our domestic overnight visitation. This is estimated using a ton of data, and so it tends to be a little slower to come in. So our official quarterly domestic overnight visitation for Q1 2021 was 8.74 million overnight visitors. So it's still decreased from Q1 2020 because Q1 2020 was mostly normal in terms of time. So we'll see, I think Q2, hopefully, we'll see growth from 2021 because that was sort of the depths of the shutdown. But because it takes so long to come in, we typically rely on Arrivalist, which is our mobile location data platform. So we can really clearly see 2019 in the blue was our normal pattern of device arrivals, and this is just the movement of devices outside of their typical routine, so it's not always So it uses it as an indicator, but not God's truth. But it really was interesting to see how this year's summer was just crazy busy for Arizona. People were tired of being indoors, and they were ready to travel. So I think we may see a little bit of a calming down in the fall, but we will keep track of it and keep reporting back. So this is another view of what our mobile device location data looks like. So here's a normal year with a normal seasonal pattern with peak in March, and again, this is statewide. Our typical feeder markets. And then you can see what I want to draw your attention to is the average distance traveled was about 383 miles. So that fell quite a bit in 2020 to less than 300 miles on average. So people were definitely staying home more. The percentage of trips by Phoenicians out to the rest of the state got a lot bigger. And here's what we're looking at so far in 2021. So not quite back to the full distance that used to be traveled. So we're not quite drawing as much from our long haul markets as we used to, but it's definitely much better than it used to be. And our seasonality is all out of whack right now. So, all right, so taking all of this data and being flexible and making sure that we were marketing in a very thoughtful and timely way, we developed the Rediscover campaign, which really focused on our incredible landscapes, our resorts, the places that needed help, and it ended up doing very well. So we changed up our target markets a little bit to fit what locations seem to be willing to travel a lot more, and that worked really well. So we were able to get an ROI of $203 for every dollar of media investment, which is great considering that overall travel spending was quite a bit lower that year. So it's very clear, this map shows the loss of travel spending from 2019 to 2020, and you can see the differences across the state on how that went. But clearly, travel spending, increasing the spend is going to be very important for our economic recovery. So we've asked our economic impact vendor, Dean Runyon, to give us monthly preliminary estimates to see how the recovery is going from a state level. So this is our typical spending pattern in 2019. And we can see that we had that really long drop in March and April of 2020, and then we just got stuck at about 40% of our normal levels for the remainder of the year. And that pattern continued a little bit for the first part, oh, my color's changed, for January and February, but then once the vaccine became widely available, we started to catch up a little bit in terms of spending. So as far as the national outlook, U.S. travel is expecting recovery of total travel spending to happen in 2024. Obviously, the lagging ones will be business and international, but this forecast was made a few months ago. So now with the reopening of travel to Europe, that will probably be revised, which I am very much look forward to seeing. And obviously, overnight business was probably the most impacted sector, and so that's one of the reasons that we're focusing on, we're continuing our Arizona Meetings Mean Business campaign to try to encourage meeting planners to book meetings here and support that industry. And of course, no tourism discussion would be complete without talking about international visitors. In a normal year, they make up 20% of our spending. In 2020, they made up 7% of our spending. So you better believe that I was jumping up and down in my seat when I heard the announcement of travel resuming between us and Europe. And in the meantime, we've really been concentrating on keeping up our brand awareness through media relations efforts, and trade sales appointments. So to end on a little bit of good news, even though it was a tough year and travel was down, we managed to grow our share. As a state, we captured 4.5% of the overnight domestic trips in the US, and normally we're about 3%. So that was a huge increase. Clearly, we had what they were looking for during the pandemic. So this was 2019 in terms of specific trip types, so about 6% of golf, 4.2% of outdoor. All of those increased significantly in terms of market share. So like I said, we had what they wanted. The other thing I thought was interesting is that marketing played a bigger role in planning for different visitors. So typically, we just typically don't see quite so much reliance on paid media as a planning source, and so that was an interesting development last year. And looking forward, we keep track of traveler sentiment along with our mobile location data. And it was encouraging to me that even though people are hesitant to travel, there's still plenty of people who are feeling very confident in their ability to navigate travel in this environment. So almost 42% say they're confident or very confident, and at least a third are somewhat confident. So I think they're still able to be influenced, still are willing to travel. And, with the rise of Delta, we saw a little bit of excitement and openness to travel information dip, but that is coming back. I don't think people are willing to give up travel to the extent that they did in 2020 anytime soon. All right, so like I said, we do regional webinars where we dig a little bit deeper into regional data, and those will be announced in Tourism Tuesday. So the sign up is at tourism.az.gov. And I am happy to answer any questions, or I'll see you afterwards. All right, thanks.
Thank you so much, Colleen. That was a fantastic presentation. We will have all of the presentations available for everybody. We can forward those. And again, if you have questions, we have the great networking reception following. So please take advantage of that opportunity to ask some questions. And I also want to say thank you to the entire team at AOT, led by Director Debbie Johnson. You have done a phenomenal job helping the state through one of the most difficult times, particularly for this industry. So kudos to you, and thanks for supporting our business as always. Next, please join me in welcoming another key partner to the AZLTA and to our industry businesses, Caroline Larson. Caroline specializes in employment litigation at AZLTA partner law firm Ogletree Deakins. Ogletree Deakins represents employers throughout the U.S. in employment, litigation, and labor relations for a wide range of industries, including hospitality. Caroline, thank you for joining us today to discuss important liability reforms and what our industry might anticipate on the legal front during these most uncertain times. Thank you.
They put the lawyer in the middle with all the doom and gloom, and I'm trying to think, did I end on a happy note? I'm like, no, I didn't, sorry. There we go. So I'm gonna give a little overview of, litigation issues that we're seeing. I'm not gonna talk terribly about the impact on the hospitality industry because, the other speakers are well versed on that. But I wanted to give you kind of an overview of what we're seeing on the litigation front. And, particularly with an emphasis on the kind of employment claims that we're seeing and that we anticipate seeing. From a litigation perspective, there's a long lag time. So whenever there's a significant business or social event or impact, it usually leads to some kind of increase in claims related to whatever the event was. But there's a lag time. There's demands from plaintiffs' lawyers. There's the plaintiffs' bar kind of getting mobilized on certain issues. So I think the wave is sort of coming, but we're seeing some claims right now, and we're seeing what kinds of claims are coming and where they're being focused, and then how some states are responding to that. Having a little, seems to be not running quite right. There we go. So, the big impact was economic. The downturn in business and leisure travel, travel restrictions, which kept people from being able to get out and about. As you all know, huge hotel and event booking cancellations. That resulted in an anticipated loss from international tourism, estimated to be somewhere between $910 billion to $1.2 trillion. And of course, there's a huge resulting impact on the employees in that industry. Approximately 1 in 10 people worldwide work in the tourism sector. So the impact of the pandemic is believed to have put 100 to 120 million jobs at risk. And again, that is a major driver in litigation. When people lose jobs, they tend to bring lawsuits. So COVID-related lawsuits, which is kind of a general term I'll talk about more specifically, have hit virtually every industry. And if you go to Ogletree.com, our website, we're doing a constantly updated litigation tracker. I think this one is actually a little behind because what we do is we track lawsuits where we can find information from public dockets about what kind of lawsuits, what kind of defendants are being named, volume of lawsuits, and what kind of claims are being asserted. So we're constantly updating that. But what we're seeing is that, lawsuits, particularly in the employment sector, asserting some kind of COVID-related claims are hitting every industry. But in particular, healthcare, because the employees there were so significantly affected, hospitality, retail, and manufacturing. Again, it impacts where employees and their businesses were affected the most by some of the impacts of COVID. So this right here, this little diagram right here shows you where hospitality falls relative to the volume of lawsuits that we're seeing across various industries. And then these are the types so far of COVID-19 related employment claims that we've been able to track. So like right now, we've currently tracked 24 clearly COVID-related lawsuits in Arizona, which is a relatively low number. California, of course, is sort of blazing the trail on volume of lawsuits, which I think shocks no one. But the kind of claims that we're seeing, are really broad, and they relate a lot to the kinds of issues and questions that we were seeing from employers during the pandemic. A lot of tort claims related to what employees claim were unsafe working conditions, and then the result on employees of exposure that they attribute to their workplace. And then related to that is a lot of whistleblower claims, retaliation claims. I complained about my employer not following protocols or not providing appropriate protection, and then they took some action against me. So we're seeing a ton of retaliation claims, which we always, even in the normal discrimination venue, retaliation claims are huge. Typically, there is, a reasonable concern that employees who complain may be the subject of some kind of action by the employer. A lot of employees, both in, what their working conditions were during the pandemic, and then as some employers have tried to reopen and bring employees back, we're seeing a lot of questions and claims related to employees who have disabilities who feel that their employer didn't take appropriate measures or offer the appropriate options to accommodate those disabilities. The Coronavirus Leave Act options were a very short window of leave that was available and compensation for certain COVID-related leave. So it was rolled out so quickly, and the regulations, trailed behind the passing of the act, and a lot of employers were struggling to figure out if they were covered, what they had to provide, how they were going to keep their operations open if they provided these various kinds of leave. So I'm not sure, because it was such a finite amount of time, if there will be a lot of claims. But I think a lot of employers really struggled to execute their obligations under the acts in the way that they were supposed to, so I wouldn't be surprised. A lot of wage and hour issues. A lot of employers were not accustomed to having employees work remotely and had to pivot. And remote work employees carry their own sort of batch of potential work wage and hour claims. So, and those are the kind of claims that lend themselves very easily to class and collective actions, which can make it more motivating for plaintiffs' lawyers to try to find classes of employees and bring those kinds of claims. So again, it's not been a huge driver yet, but I think if we see an uptick in litigation, employment-related litigation from COVID issues, wage and hour is going to be one of them. And then just various issues about like compliance with, for unionized environments, compliance with collective bargaining obligations, And then, again, the pivot to working remotely, a lot of employers, a lot of businesses didn't have some of the safeguards and infrastructure in place for that. So there are some claims we've seen related to data and privacy breaches. So again, this chart I think is not the most recent version, but you can go to the tracker on our site. There are a couple of litigation trackers online and sort them by industry and see where certain industries, you can sort it and see where the claims per state are per industry. And the issues are the same. We're seeing the same kind of claims in the hospitality industry. A lot of claims alleging retaliation, a lot of tort claims alleging that there was negligence in keeping employees and guests safe, for COVID exposure, some wrongful death claims, and then various kinds of discrimination claims in handling accommodations for employers that had to do RIFs or furloughs. Sometimes we see discrimination claims that spiral out of that when employees have questions about how the selection criteria were implemented for those reductions. So just a couple of, the lawsuits that have already been filed. The New York Attorney General sued a big multinational company, and there were claims that there were unsafe practices, that the environment wasn't safe, and that when employees complained about it, they were discriminated against, or I'm sorry, they were retaliated against. There was a claim from an employee already, litigation filed from an employee with an immune compromised condition who claimed that he told his employer that he wanted to continue being able to work from home because he thought that was safer while the coronavirus was still rampant and the vaccine was not available. And then when his claim is that when he was terminated when he didn't return to the office as instructed. Some employees have brought claims claiming that when coworkers were exposed to COVID, the employer didn't advise them or instructed employees who'd been exposed to continue coming to work. And then there was a grocery store in Florida where for about the first month during the pandemic, they weren't requiring employees to wear wet masks. The claim in the lawsuit is that employees weren't allowed to wear masks. The family has alleged that he contracted the coronavirus at work and passed away, and they've brought a claim on his behalf. So in response to that, what we're seeing is this tracker tracks legislation, proposed legislation, or executive orders that have been implemented to try, basically what we call liability shields, for the state to try to impose some standards and some restrictions that limit the kinds of lawsuits that can be brought or limit the exposure, the liability that employers and businesses can face. So what we've been tracking from a liability shield perspective often covers both businesses facing potential claims from guests or from customers, as well as claims from employees. So we have Arizona revised statute, which was signed into effect, I think, in April of this year. It was passed by the Senate and then passed in the Congress and then signed into law by Governor Ducey in April, ARS 12515, which was implemented as a liability protection for employers and businesses. And so it sets a standard that if a business can demonstrate that it adopted reasonable practices in good faith to protect anybody, so it's guests, customers, employees, vendors and visitors, as long as they had reasonable procedures in place, then anybody who wants to bring a claim related to any kind of COVID-19 exposure or failure to provide certain protections has to demonstrate a willful misconduct or gross negligence. So I think a lot of the thinking is it extends to individuals who've been in environments, and it extends a lot to healthcare workers because there was so much uncertainty about what kind of treatments and protocols to implement and what kind of things worked and what didn't. So there's a lot of specific protections in there for healthcare providers. for individuals who now claim after the fact that they didn't receive the care that they think was appropriate. But for businesses, it's very broad protection, and it's, again, we're not seeing, a huge crush of lawsuits, but I think it's something that that a lot of businesses will be offering as an affirmative defense when they're facing litigation from people who say, basically, I came to your business, I think I was exposed. If the company can cite to reasonable policies and following protocols that were in place at the time, then they should be able to assert a defense against liability. Not surprisingly, we're also seeing a lot of litigation related to claims that companies have tried to bring based on their property insurance for when they have provisions that protect them from lost business income. So thus far, we've seen at least 1,700 lawsuits from businesses that are seeking insurance coverage for their business losses. The cases are not going terribly well. After sort of some of the avian flu outbreaks, the swine flu outbreaks, which had some more significant impacts in other countries, a lot of insurers started adding exceptions for vaccine-related or public health-related issues from their lost income provisions, the insurance coverage that they provide. And so they're citing that as an exception, and they're doing relatively well. In 93% of the cases decided in federal court, out of 241 cases, the insurers have been able to secure dismissals. They're not doing as well in state court. So only 54% of the cases that have been decided already in state courts have been dismissed, and that is a smaller number. The businesses that have been seeking insurance coverage have also been appealing a lot of those. 107 of the dismissals have already been appealed. So, what part of what it comes down to here is, we passed this provision in Arizona, a statute to try to protect businesses and particularly and employers as well from some of these claims. But a state statute like ARS 12515 isn't going to protect against any claims brought under federal law. So a lot of the federal protections, OSHA, the WARN Act, which governs these reductions in force and furloughs, those kind of claims are not going to be affected or barred by any of the state law liability shields. So, again, for the protections that we can, cite to, that we can try to take advantage of, what we're recommending is to continue to comply with the ever-changing, protocols and recommendations for what sort of procedures and policies are appropriate for various workplaces. So, whether it's masks, social distancing, PPE for employees, limitations on capacity, greater use of outdoor spaces, whatever sort of recommendations or industry guidelines or standards are available, we think that will help support that affirmative defense that the business took reasonable precautions. And then, so it's part of it is keeping abreast of what some of the laws or changes are. Arizona has been, pretty aggressive about opposing sort of some statewide mandates. So it gives us actually a little bit less guidance as to what exactly companies do or don't have to do. So then we sort of look to some industry guidance or standards. And then if you have any COVID exposures, whether it's employees or guests, we recommend maintaining all of the documentation, because if there are claims down the road, you want to keep documentation of any, what you did to, what, cleanings and sanitation and procedures you'd had in effect at the time. If you have an exposure, to get statements from the employees who were responsible for that cleaning that it was in fact done. So a lot of times you'll have like a cleaning and sanitation log for various public areas. An employee initials it, that it was done. But if you had an exposure, workplace exposure, we would recommend writing that out into a more comprehensive statement. So if down the road you have a claim and you can't find the employee, you've at least got that evidence. And then, continue to screen your employees for symptoms, and keeping, again, documentation if you have a workplace exposure of, when you notified other employees, this keeping the schedules to show that you took any affected employees off the schedule, that they weren't permitted to come to work. If you tell people in a meeting to try to follow up with an email or a text, again, so you have documentation that you informed them, help make testing and, other appropriate reactions available. And then the same signs that we've been seeing asking people to refrain from visiting if they are experiencing any symptoms or they know they've had exposure. Like I said, we're just kind of getting a glimpse at this time, but I do think more is coming. Unfortunately, again, I wish I could have come up with something happier to end with, but it's just a very creative employment bar. And you can't have that volume of employees, particularly in certain industries affected, and not expect the plaintiff's bar to take advantage of that with litigation. But like I said, you can kind of keep an eye on the tracker, and if you're continuing to deal with some of these issues like workplace safety, still reopening offices, remote workers, I think it's still time to be vigilant about the employment compliance, because, like I said, I think the plaintiff's bar is keeping their ear to the ground. Thank you.
Caroline, thank you so much. Very, very important for this industry. I think we're all very familiar with what happened with the ADA lawsuits that really ravaged this industry and continue to ravage. One of our biggest wins last session was getting SB 1377 signed and in place, which provides liability protections. We were part of a big coalition that was able to get that accomplished. So very, very important again for this industry. Today's final presenter joins us all the way from Nashville. We're thrilled to have STR Senior Vice President of Global Business Development, Vail Ross. Vail is responsible for the overall coordination, functional management, and leadership of business development, marketing strategies, and activities for STR family of companies. She's often featured as a guest speaker at international, national, regional, and state conferences, and has an insightful presentation on what lies ahead for Arizona's hospitality industry, preliminary projections for 2022, and more. Welcome, Vail, and thank you for coming all the way from Nashville.
All right, so more data between cocktails. So I'm going to definitely cover a good amount in the next couple of 15 minutes or so, but as we've all mentioned, these will be available, so please sit back and don't worry about taking a bunch of notes. So just wanted to cover, as mentioned earlier, I'm going to kind of set the stage of just what are we seeing in the total U.S., and we're going to talk a lot about weekly data. Colleen mentioned earlier that the state's been, we had to shift during COVID and really went from, we'd always focused month over month, what was happening long term. Really, we've shifted that. What's happening day over day? What's happening week after week? Because things are constantly changing. So I'm going to share with you what we're seeing on the weekly trends for the U.S. And then I'm going to dig deep into the 4 submarkets within these regions to kind of dig deeper of what we're seeing from hotel performance on a weekly basis, and then sum this all up with what we are seeing for U.S. forecast and the forecast for the submarkets as well. And talk a little bit about the nuances of doing forecasting in a time of COVID. Just don't bet on any of these numbers is all I have to say up front. So looking at the total U.S. weekly performance, the good news is we're 3 points higher than we were last week, but we are continuing to see a decline in overall weekly occupancy for the total U.S. We hit our peak in middle of July, where our industry hit about 72% occupancy. It's real no surprise that we're seeing these slowdowns as the summer season's starting to come to an end and schools are starting to open up. There was also a dip in there just with the surge of the Delta variants, which has started to kind of take its toll on some areas. Really, it's very area specific. On the good news is that if we do look at just the overall, all of the hotels that report to STR on a weekly basis, we're still continuing to see the majority of them report to us occupancies of 60% or more. That number's starting to get a little bit smaller due to the fact of the seasonality, but still the majority of the markets that report to us are in that 60% or higher occupancy buckets. When we look across the chain scales, and STR doesn't not only just look at what's happening on a total macro level, but what's happening with luxury hotels and select service and limited service, it's no surprise if we look at occupancy and index it to 2019, that the segments that have been hit the hardest are obviously those full-service hotels, highly impacted by the lack of corporate, the lack of group, the lack of international. Majority of these properties, if you look at the contribution to overall occupancy for the US, are in a lot of the gateway cities. What's also probably no surprise is that we've seen occupancy levels either hit or exceed 2019 levels on the select service side. A lot of those are located off the interstate. They are not only appealing to the leisure traveler, they're also appealing to a lot of the business that was continuing to operate during COVID because it was essential workers that were traveling, and these were hotels where there were government per diems or there were contracts that were already negotiated. As for rate, it's a little bit of a different story. So historically, our industry, when we have been in a downturn, the minute we start to see demand fall, we cut rates like crazy. That has not been the case in this downturn. So that's been a good thing from a profitability standpoint because we've had to be very creative as an industry on how we drive to the bottom line with labor expenses going up, with not having as much of ancillary spend and revenue coming into our properties. So all in all, as an industry, across all of the segments, we have either hit or exceeded ADR to where we were in 2019 across all the segments. We're seeing a little bit of a slowdown in some of that select service, but again, we're suspecting that's going to happen just with the slowdown of summer travel and school being back in session. One thing that we're not talking a lot about group performance because there really isn't any group performance these days, but the little bit of group that we are seeing is on the weekend business. So looking at the leisure travelers that maybe had to postpone their family reunion or their anniversaries or their weddings, they are now coming back and having those group events more on the weekends. So the little bit of pickup that our industry is seeing on that group side is primarily coming from more of the leisure group side of the business, not the corporate. And we do not really suspect the corporate to come back to levels of 2019 till likely 2024, but that's all dependent on lots of different things. One thing we did learn for sure about this downturn is that location means everything. And if you look at the top 25 markets, the dark orange bar is where the performance was in 2019, and the light orange is where it was as of week ending September 18th. New Orleans, highly impacted by the hurricane, and that's what drives that occupancy. They've also, I was talking to the folks who run the tourism bureau there, and in the central business district of New Orleans, which wasn't hit as badly, they are seeing some of that leisure traveler come back. They actually got their power back within a couple of days versus the region that was around it, as we all know, really, really struggled. But what is interesting is that we have continued to, as these weeks progress, see less and less of the top 25 markets hitting their occupancy levels of where they were in 2019. And even less of them are starting to hit their ADR. So again, looking at average daily rate from where it was the week ending September 18th to where it was in 19, markets like San Diego, Orange County, California, some of the, I don't want to say smaller top 25 markets, but those that are very leisure driven are ones that are continuing to hit average daily rate. So enough about the US, let's talk about what's going on in your backyard. All right, so I pulled out, based on the conversations I had with Kim, knowing the audience, I pulled out 4 of the submarkets within what we track that you all represent within these cities. So looking at Prescott and Sedona and Flagstaff, and then the Grand Canyon area houses the community of Williams and Page. So you can look at the overall sheer size of inventory of how many rooms are represented in these areas. They're very diverse, very different in the state, in the sense of what types of hotels and how many hotels they have. And we're going to dive into depth about the different performance. If you are interested in knowing, if you don't know what hotels are in these submarkets and would like to know based on STR's definition of these submarkets, I'm happy to send you a participation list so you can see who's involved. Just my email's at the end of this, and I'll be happy to share that. So let's quickly look at demand. And this is when you guys are all gonna have your eye charts. So we got a lot of line charts going on. I tried to make this as visually friendly as possible, but it's not great. So just wanted to sheerly look at demand and where we were before the pandemic from a total demand standpoint, the ebb and flows of what happened as we went through this downturn to where we are today. And I have to say the good news is that if we're just looking at demand on a weekly basis, all of these submarkets have gotten back to where they were, and in some cases throughout the year progression has exceeded from a demand standpoint from where they were pre-pandemic. Focusing on occupancy, looking at the leader within the group right now, it's been Flagstaff. So started out, began in April, well, right before April and everything fell down. Their average occupancy was a little under 71%. They hit a new peak in March of, and I'm looking at smiling faces because you guys probably know why. I'm assuming it's seasonal and it's travel and other great things that are happening. There could be other events that were happening. But there was a peak of a 92% occupancy the week of March 20th. So things have naturally slowed down and now hovering around 70% occupancy. Second in line is the Prescott-Sedona submarket there. Again, started out before the pandemic, a little more than 68% occupancy, hit a new peak in, again, that March 20th week of a little more than 85% occupancy, and now is hovering a little more than 64%. And if you look at, because Colleen and I were just talking beforehand, I did a quick glance of looking at luxury versus luxury and upper upscale and upscale and so on. Luxury right now, if you look at the luxury and upper upscale combined, is running an occupancy a little more than 71%. So really a high driver. They're all above 60%, so doing incredibly well. Then thirdly on that list is that Grand Canyon submarket, which again, as I mentioned, houses the community of Williams. Again, hit this all-time peak kind of early on in April, got to over 85% occupancy. These are incredibly high occupancy numbers that we are not seeing in a lot of submarkets. And the submarkets that we do see these levels of high occupancies are ones that have a lot of outdoor recreation, are drivable, have outdoor space, don't feel confined, are resort-type locations. Those are the submarkets across the U.S. that we have continued to see strong recovery. Places like Pigeon Forge, Tennessee, that is, in Tennessee where I live, and Chattanooga, Tennessee. These were destinations that weren't always on the map of high performers and that we are seeing similar to what we're seeing here. And then Page obviously has been impacted highly with not having a lot of that international traveler and the bus tours, but again, did get back to where they were pre-pandemic a couple of times throughout the past 24 months, or excuse me, past 18 months, and is hovering around 57% occupancy. So with all that said, how does that compare to just indexing that to 2019, which has really been what us at STR have helped our customers do. It's great to know what happened. Really 2020 was such a wash. 2019 may be a little unfair to our industry because it was the highest performing year ever. However, you can see that there have been within your own community some of these submarkets that have either hit or exceeded occupancy as far as going back to April, the week of April 24th to where we were in September 18th. Naturally, there's been a little bit of a slowdown. We're seeing that in a national trend as well. From an ADR standpoint, We've got Prescott and Sedona. I'm sorry if I pronounced that incorrectly. Prescott. All right, perfect. Prescott and Sedona. Incredibly strong rates, and this is an aggregate of all of them. Again, if you look at the higher end, the rates are hovering more on average at about $380. So incredibly strong, have well exceeded where we were pre-pandemic. So again, going back to the fact that the revenue management skills, we've all become a whole lot smarter in prior downturns and where we are today to make sure that we're doing the best that we can with the demand and the occupancy in which we have. Followed then by that Grand Canyon area. Again, the good news and kind of the trending, and you'll be able to have a copy of this to look on your own time, but the overall theme is that rates are back to where they were or above where they were pre-pandemic. And that goes for all of the submarkets, some a little bit higher than others, but all in all, getting back to where they were pre-pandemic, and in some cases, continuing to hover stronger. So from indexing to the top to where we were in 2019 levels, again, doing very well in most of the scenarios. Page struggling a little bit, but we all know why that is. And hopefully with now the opening up, we'll get to see that community really benefit from getting some international travelers back. They're at about 72% to where they were in 2019 from a rate standpoint. So still moving up in the right direction. All right, forecast. Drum roll. First, we're going to start with the total U.S., and we're going to talk about forecasting accuracy. So forecasting is not easy to do during normal times, as we all know, and by no means am I making excuses for if I'm here next year saying, well, we were totally off, but hopefully we were totally off on we were more conservative than otherwise. So our partner in forecasting is Tourism Economics, and we have always done, in full transparency, what we actually forecasted and what actually happened. And we'll be releasing this for second quarter coming up, but I wanted to share with you first quarter where we are hitting the mark, where we're not really hitting the mark, and a little bit on the conservative side is ADR and demand. Again, and that's not bad. We were forecasting a little less growth, and the industry had more growth. These are the two areas specifically with ADR, because historically when our industry should be having some of the highest ADRs that they should ever have, we haven't. In this scenario, we have actually been doing quite well. So for the total US, I have where we were in 2020, what we're forecasting in 21 and in 22. And a new little comparable there is the last time we saw that RevPAR, what year was that? So in 2020, when we saw these performance numbers, the last time we saw them was in 1995. So we don't want to have, which we all remember, that was one of the downturns that our industry experienced. So we are forecasting for 2021 for overall RevPAR to be around $63. Overall forecast for occupancy a little shy of 55%, ADR are a little more than $115. For 2022, occupancy is a little under 62%, rate around $122, and RevPAR. So looking at that index to where we are to 2019, you can see we are still not back to 2019 levels in these KPIs. And we do not suspect that we will be until 2024. And a lot of the wild card is around corporate and group. That could escalate it to come sooner. But as of right now, based on the trends that we're seeing, we don't foresee that getting back to full KPI performance levels compared to 2019 until 2024. So here are the eye charts as well, and again, you're gonna get a copy of this. So through our parent company, CoStar, we have the ability to, a submarket like Prescott and Sedona, we would not be forecasting on a regular basis at STR and Tourism Economics. But through our parent company and through the data that they utilize from us, we are able to forecast out further. So looking at just forecasting trends using the model that we have done with our parent company, CoStar, we can go out as far as 5 years. So I've done 3 years because the accuracy of 5 years, the further you get out, the more volatile it is. But the point is that from an occupancy standpoint, we are looking that this submarket will definitely get to recovery and exceed occupancy levels likely in the first part of 2022. As it comes to rate, have already exceeded where we were back in 2018 and 2019, and we will continue to see that grow as we move. And then just overall, what that contribution of RevPAR looks like. So this is key. You can obviously, you're all hoteliers in the room, depending on what's driving the RevPAR, is it rate, is it occupancy, can have a lot of differences on bottom line and profitability. And you'd like to see a good balance. So I've shared with you all just our forecast of where we see that balance. You can see in about August of '23 where there's a good balance between rate growth and occupancy growth that's contributing to the overall forecast. Similar trend lines for the Flagstaff submarket. Again, getting back to those occupancy levels likely in 2022, if not a little bit sooner, have already kind of hit them and then slowed down a little bit, but definitely into 2024, well exceeding where we were in 2019. From a rate standpoint, kind of feel like a broken record, have already hit it, would foresee it to continue to exceed. And you can see the growth there of where we're projecting it for 2024. Contribution, again, more of an ADR contribution in '23 than occupancy. That's likely going to be a common theme as well. And for the Grand Canyon area, again, that Williams, not yet occupancy levels into '24, getting closer, but not yet there to what we saw in 2018 and 2019. However, with rate well exceeding it. So continuing to drive and look into those areas of opportunity based on customer mix. And again, more ADR growth than occupancy growth for '23. Sadly enough, for those of you who are from the Page community, we are not able to do a forecast. The way that our model works is that if we don't have 30 hotels or more within a market, the accuracy is not as good. So we are looking at changing that methodology to look at the amount of participating hotels and not just taking into consideration the amount of hotels in the market, because there are a lot of markets, there's like 23% of the markets in the US that kind of fall in this bucket, but that STR gets data from over 85% of the participating hotels. So the accuracy of the forecast should be good. So hopefully this time next year, we'll have a forecast for Page, but as of right now, I'm sad that we don't. But to end on a wrap-up, I think I did okay, only 20 minutes. Demand drivers are really on that transient consumer. That's not only a trend that we're seeing here, we're seeing it in the US as well. ADR continues to be the driver for RevPAR growth as of today and as what we see in the future. Really, that business traveler and groups are going to be needed now more than ever as we start to see leisure slow down just due to the seasonality. We're going into what would be coming into group and corporate travel time, and we need to get that back. And for the total US, I would say our forecast is good. We're not back to 2019 levels. The good news for you guys is that there are several submarkets that are going to be back at 2019 levels into '22. So that is a good note to end on. And there is my email. If you should want to email me, you are going to get a copy of this as well. I don't know if there are any questions. Okay. Well, thank you all very much for your time.
Vail, thank you so much for that very insightful information. And I really want to encourage everybody to please thank both the Chamber, Candace at the Chamber and Tourism Bureau, as well as Stan with the Enchantment Resort. They really made Northern Arizona's forecast event possible. Initially, we weren't going to be able to do it because of limitations and staff size and whatnot, and they really lobbied to ensure that we kept all regions represented. So please take a moment to thank them for their generosity in making this happen. Last but certainly not least, I would be remiss if I didn't take a moment to thank the incredible, the tiny but mighty team at the AZLTA. They go above and beyond to ensure that you guys get information, resources, and representation that we know is more important now than ever before. Please thank Cardine Jimenez, Ricardo Luna, and Anna Della McBean for the extraordinary job they do. Lastly, I'd like to thank you, each and every one of you again for attending. Really, really appreciate it. We've got a wonderful networking reception right now out in the courtyard. I'm stalling because I've been threatened with a birthday song, but you know what? I look forward to toasting each and every one of you and look forward to the reception. So thank you again for attending.